From Screen to Shelf.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 44 of the From Screen to Shelf podcast. Today, we are going to be doing things a little bit, I'd say, more personal. So we're going to not really talk about things broadly, but we're going to kind of talk about things that we connect with. And to more or less frame it and give a template of how our conversation is going to go, we're more or less going to talk about our favorite directors, the genres that they have, more or less put a lot of volume into, or why we like what they do, why we're attracted to them. Maybe break down some of their movies, not necessarily in a spoiler fashion or necessarily on a plot level, but explain why it resonates with us and why we hold them differently from other directors. And just really just kind of just let our emotions flow with the movies that we love. That's really kind of how we're going to frame this. So we each picked one director that we've seen a lot of or that we just really, really thoroughly enjoy. And so I will go ahead and kick it off with, I think this is pretty well known at this point that David Cronenberg is like my my guy. Like I adore. Like I rewatch Videodrome constantly. Like his movies are just so unique. There is not a single director that does what he does successfully. There are plenty of people that try to do what he does, but always fall short because they just don't have the same thought process and the same way that they approach their craft. So one of the reasons why specifically David Cronenberg speaks to me is he's just a very intelligent guy. He puts a lot of thought into everything that he does. He puts insane detail, like to the level of Stanley Kubrick, where everything has insane thought, from the way that this glass is on the counter, from the way that the TVs are positioned, every single thing, from the way that the characters are staring at screens. Like in Videodrome, every single thing in that has a meaning, a message, a vibe, and a reason to it. And I love movies that are infinitely rewatchable because you can always take something more away from it. And that's what he's the master of. Even Gabe, I know you've seen this one, like A Dangerous Method. It's something that's completely different. It's not necessarily my favorite. I think it's a really well done movie. But it's completely different. There's no body horror. You're mostly exploring like the psychology of the mind and the psyche, which to some people can be horrifying. Whenever like Freud initially found all of his stuff, it was different. It was polarizing to some people to question what was the norm. And that's what Cronenberg found exciting about it. He found like the reactions to some of Sigmund Freud, and I already forget Michael Fassbender's character. Young. The difference in opinions and the way that people question again what the norm is, and that's essentially what got him interested in that. And then Keira Knightley's character, I think she's the most fascinating out of everybody. Not everything is horror. He's even got one called Map to the Stars, where it's about like the horrors in Hollywood. You know, there's always a monster somewhere in one of his movies, whether it's internally, whether it's psychologically, whether it's physically, like in The Fly. And I think monsters that aren't just 6-foot cockroaches that are destroying buildings, I think it's just really nice to see, you know, because, you know, you get a bunch of that. I can watch tons of Godzilla ripoffs. I can watch tons of slasher ripoffs, which I do, and they're fun, but none of them necessarily correlate the way that he always tells his story. Some even further examples of why he's so malleable and why I can just really dissect his filmography. He has a movie called Fast Company. Did you guys know that he made a racing movie?
No.
Yeah, it's called Fast Company, and it's got one of the best fucking scores in a movie ever, man. It's just so groovy. But it's got John Saxon in it.
What year was that? That had to be like before the
78 or 79. Right? I want to say it was before The Brood. I want to say it was 78 or 79.
I have his filmography here.
Yeah,
it's 79.
79. Yep.
Same year as The Brood, actually.
Oh, really? I didn't
Yeah.
realize he came out with 2 movies. And it's just not a movie you think that he'd make, you know, because he
Yeah,
gets
I'm looking at
known
the
for, like,
poster. It does
dude,
not look like a
yeah.
David Cronenberg movie.
No, exactly, man. Like, he has all of these, like, unique thoughts and processes, and he even said himself, like, you get used to something like The Fly and Videodrome, and he referenced in a, interview whenever Cosmopolis was going around, and he
Mhm.
would hear a lot, "This isn't a very David Cronenberg movie," and he was like, "Who are
Mm.
you to tell me what my movies are? Like, I am David Cronenberg. I made the movie. What does that even mean?" You know, like, he's such a goofy guy, and he doesn't understand, like he gets it because he
Yeah.
pioneered a genre. He understands his status. He doesn't necessarily like that status because then you get put in a box and he can't make A Dangerous Method. He can't make Cosmopolis. He can't make
Mhm.
Eastern Promises, you know, because people just start questioning it. But I think that's why he's so malleable, bringing nightmares to life and portraying it in a way that, Gabe, you could watch Videodrome and I get something different from it, and then you get
Mhm.
something different, and Will could have a completely different thought process about it. And that's what makes his movies so fun because every single one of them, you can really, really go into a detailed and long-winded conversation about what it means. Naked
Yeah.
Lunch. Have either of you guys seen that? Will, that sounds like a movie you've seen.
Yeah, Naked Lunch is great. I actually really enjoy
I've never
Naked Lunch a
seen
lot.
Naked Lunch.
Gabe, I actually think you'll despise that movie. I'm not even
Really?
gonna lie. I don't
Well,
think
you
you'll
see, I
like
mean,
it.
the thing I like about Cronenberg, just kind of what you were
Yeah.
saying, though, even though he has like some misses, I'm going through his filmography, and I know, me saying there's a miss to Chase is like blasphemy, but I
Blasphemy.
mean, I respect Cronenberg. There are some movies that I really, really love that he's done. Like, I mean, like we were
Yeah.
talking, you had brought up Dangerous Method. I don't know why you brought that movie up. Like you had texted, you're like, rate it, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Because your letterbox
um,
is so empty and I know you
yeah,
watched it.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that movie, I love that movie, and I love, Eastern Promises. Like, I think that's one of,
It's
like,
great.
my favorite movies that he's done. All
Yeah.
of his movies are just, and History of Violence, too. Fucking love
I think that
History of
movie's a
Violence.
genuine masterpiece.
Yeah, it's a fucking incredible movie, and I think what he does so well is just
Mm.
he is able to kind of do so many different kind of genres. I mean, I don't even think that term exists to Cronenberg. You know what I mean? I think he
No, it
just
doesn't.
it doesn't. It's just like he looks at the narrative and the story. He's like, okay, I'm gonna do that movie. I don't think he looks at it as a genre piece. He looks at it as like what is the narrative and story that I'm trying to tell with these characters? Like Dangerous Method, you said
Yeah.
that's not really a movie you think he would do, but he was really intrigued with the whole kind of psychology of the mind and Freud
Yeah.
and Jung and they're falling out and I think he is like most concerned with is just like human nature in general and
Yeah.
exploring human nature. And I don't think he cares what genre he does that through. He just wants
Yeah.
to tell a good narrative. So even though there are movies he's done that like The Brood, when you showed it to me, I'm like, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not like it's not my thing, but like I respect the fact he can go from like The Brood to like Eastern Promises to History of
Yeah.
Violence and just kind of cycle through all these different kinds of movies and do something different. And every
Yeah.
time he puts a new movie out, you're like, okay, this is going to be something different that we haven't seen before.
Always. And that's really well said. And that's why it gets me excited. Like, he has a new movie coming out called The Shrouds, and it's about like whenever you look at the tombstone of a loved one, it will holographically project them. That way you can still experience them as if they were living. Where
Mm.
the fuck did you come up with that idea? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where did you think about that? It's the same thing with like a lot of his movies are book adaptations. A lot of people don't realize that because it's very, very loose. He's got a lot of original ideas, but like Naked Lunch um, is a book that was written as like a shock novel at the time. It made no sense. It was purely written. It doesn't have a plot. It's just to
Mhm.
shock you, and he
Yeah.
loved that movie and it was really popular. I believe it came out in 1958, but he always wanted to adapt it. But then he got tagged to it because literally everybody said the only person in this world that can make this movie and make it make sense is Cronenberg. But it's
Mm.
so loosely adapted, but it's still absolutely crazy. You know, like he even tied in like real life aspects of his life, like with typewriters and his love and hate for them into this movie and made them like a central part of like the science fiction evolution of what he's trying to like convey his
Mhm.
message through. I think that movie, I just rewatched it like last week, actually in the Discord with a watch party, and those different eyes on that movie helped me appreciate it in a way I didn't know I could love that movie because the things that it's going so fast all the time. And again, it goes to my same point where there's so much to dissect. even A History of Violence I just rewatched. I feel like that's probably one of
Great
his
movie.
most. It's amazing. It's a genuine 10 out of 10 masterpiece in that genre. That is one of my favorites of all times, up there with Eastern Promises. I felt like that movie was super simplistic and probably one of his easiest to digest movies, but there's still so many layers to it. You know,
And that one was based off of I didn't
a
know
novel.
until a graphic novel, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I had no idea. It's a DC graphic novel. Like someone had told me this like a few months ago, and I was like, no freaking way. I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, dude does nothing but read, dude. Like that's all he does is read books.
But I mean, I
man.
think that's cool that even like a DC graphic novel, you know what I mean? It's like if someone said, "Hey, Cronenberg's reading a DC graphic novel right now," like it just sounds weird. But
Yeah.
I mean, that I think that shows like how receptive and open he is to different ideas. Like he doesn't care where it comes from, right? It's like this come from a book or a movie or short story or whatever, and he's like, I want to explore the themes in this book or what I just read, or try to replicate this the best I can. And that's what I respect about him, is that he really doesn't have any boundaries with what he's trying to put on the screen.
Yeah, and that's extremely well said. And I think it represents in his art, but I've been listening to a lot of interviews with him lately, and one of the things that he always says is he wants to be the laziest director you've worked with. And so he says the reason is like, because he'll get a lot of people, like he works with Viggo Mortensen a lot.
Yeah.
Vincent Cassel, he's worked with a lot. He's worked with a major name in almost every single one of his movies. He's got a lot of talent that's come and gone. James Spader, if I'm saying his name right, from Crash. But he always says he looks for people that he doesn't need to direct, because a good actor will read his script and embody what he's trying to say. He can't tell you, or he can tell you to act and be a certain way, but a good actor, he shouldn't have to do. He should be able to just present to you the story and just film what you're doing.
Yeah.
And he said the same thing about Keira Knightley playing the lady in A Dangerous Method, that like at most he had to do 2 takes with her every single time she was in a take in that movie. And he just found it astounding, found her brilliant. Same with Kristen Stewart in Crimes of the Future. So the thing is like he directs and he puts this all together for the people that he's around, but he can get away with a lot because all of his movies have been like independently funded. He hasn't really had major studio releases. He's had big budget things, but they're always getting overtaken and done on his dime. He doesn't have to, if he wants to change the color of a shirt, he doesn't have to wait for a studio exec to tell him in 2 weeks, yeah, you can change the color of that shirt. He's just doing it right there, And that's what he finds so free forming about it. So once you just have that free forming environment and then you just let these actors do what they're great at, you get the products like Spider. I don't know if you guys have seen Spider. It's Rafe. I think you say his name's Rafe. I think it's how you pronounce it. Rafe Fiennes is in that movie. And it's about
I can never say his name. I don't know why.
Yeah, because like they say it differently, but the way it's like spelled when you look at it,
Ralph.
isn't how it's,
I always say Ralph Fiennes, and I know that's wrong, but
yeah, it's like
actor.
Rafe. I think. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
And that movie, Ray Fiennes did like a lot of research in like schizophrenia and stuff, and it there was one where he was talking about where he got like letters because of the movie, because like there's this bathtub scene in there and he's kind of like freaking out while being in the water, and apparently that's like super accurate with like how reactive people can be to certain elements and changes, and with different elements being introduced onto them physically. And apparently it's just extremely well done. It's a great movie, but that's what it is. Like there's not a single movie that if somebody tells me, oh, I don't like horror, well, shit, you're not escaping Cronenberg. I've still got some absolute heat for you. You know what I mean?
You have
I've got
a racing film you could write.
Yeah. I have so many different movies, but he's also got a certain way that they're shot, a certain way that they're always written. And it's one thing I can say is they're never boring. It doesn't matter. Like one of his most famous movies, Dead Ringers, I'm actually not a massive fan of, but it's considered to be one of his best. I just find it a little, just the story didn't excite me as much as it did others, But that doesn't make it a bad movie. I think his worst movie is a 6 out of 10. And I know some people didn't like Crimes of the Future, but I respected the hell out of the meaning of that movie, which is being like not necessarily anti-pollution. It's about how it's incredible that our bodies are accepting microplastics and not rejecting them. Like our bodies are maintaining microplastics in our body. How the fuck does that work? That's the central message. And the reason he made the movie is like, that's so crazy to think about. That we've got
He's the only one
sitting
thinking about that.
Yeah. He's just sitting there,
Cronenberg's just like
76
having
years
his
old.
coffee in the morning. He's like, yeah, it's kind of weird that our bodies are tolerating microplastics. Let me call the studio up and see if I can get a movie made about that.
Dude, and it's crazy because he really is like, I really implore anybody just to type in David Cronenberg interviews and listening to his passion and the way he's talking. You would think with the movies he's put out there, even he said this about himself, that Martin Scorsese was terrified to meet him. He told him that over the phone that he's terrified to meet him. But
Really?
he rebutted to him. He's like, I should be terrified of you because you made Taxi Driver, is what he told him.
Yeah.
And so then they met each other, and him and like Martin Scorsese are like actually good friends now,
Oh, that's cool.
But he thought he was like a depraved, like I guess he thought he was like Marilyn Manson or something, man.
Yeah.
But he's just a calm older dude that wants to vibe and make art for people to enjoy and then move on to the next thing. And I respect the living hell out of that. Crimes of the Future, he actually wrote in like 1998, man, about microplastics. That's fucking wild, dude. Like, that is crazy.
In
Yeah.
1980,
way ahead
whatever.
of when people
1998.
started to even be conscious about that kind of stuff
What the
too.
hell?
Like very ahead of its
Yeah.
time in that sense.
Yeah, and he would always have like, I know some people might wonder that are Cronenberg nuts out there as well. I can't talk about him without bringing up how ahead of its time Videodrome is.
Hmm.
That movie is 40 years ahead of its time, man. It's super relevant today. It makes massive sense when you watch it. I think that movie is better today than it ever has been because it's society-wise extremely relatable in the message that it's trying to convey. But all in all, that's really what I actually like really like about David Cronenberg. I think that he's just extremely unique in everything that he does. The Shrouds, yeah, he's 81 years old and still pumping out movies. And I don't think that he's had a movie that I would not watch at all. I've watched Fast Company like 5 times and I don't care about racing car movies. It's actually really well done. It's got John Saxon and it's got an incredible score in it. It's just not a movie I expected.
Is there something, because we were talking about this before rolling, because this is a difficult thing to kind of talk about with your favorite director. Is there something you feel like he should like do better or that he could do better? This is like blasphemy for Chace, but like, is there something you wish, like, is there a common complaint with Cronenberg that people like bring up, recurrently with them?
The biggest complaint about him is that he got out of body horror, man. But he doesn't understand that the critique of like, you were known for like the mutilation of the body and like telling a story with every cut and every like blood vessel that's showing, like even with Scanners, that's what he was known for. So then that kind of goes back to the dialogue I was talking about where it's like, well, this isn't a very Cronenberg movie. And he's like, well, who the fuck are you? I'm Cronenberg. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? So it goes back to that. I've seen a lot of people say that, but the thing is once you watch one of those non-body horror movies, you aren't going to question it. If you've only seen Videodrome, The Fly, and Scanners, and I tell you to watch A History of Violence, and you say that was dog shit, I'm going to question. Like, I don't care. Like, take my fanboyism away. That's a masterpiece of a movie. It's so well done. It's a great movie. And if you don't like that, which is cool, we're allowed to have our taste. I just don't see how you cannot like that. That's an example of going from completely different genres and absolutely hitting the ball out of the park. It's an absolute home run. I really can't think of many, man.
Because you're fanboying right now.
No, there's just
I'm just
there's
kidding.
some
I'm just
movies
joking.
like it's like some of his older like Rabbit and Shivers, I respect them, but they're probably my least rewatched because I think there's better horror movies. Even though like Shivers, I don't know if you knew this, influenced a lot in Alien. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Dan O'Bannon, who I believe was the script writer, had actually like talked very highly before writing Alien about Shivers because it also has the same dynamic where like the things come out of your mouth. So there's actually like, he jokes about it all the time that he needs to get his royalty check. Like it's not that similar, but it's enough to laugh about it. You know what I mean?
That's cool.
So yeah, I really don't know. I guess like if I would say anything, it's that I can't even say that he's not wholly original. I just don't think that he has a Videodrome after Crash, because Crash is some people's Videodrome, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Some people have seen Crash and never seen Videodrome, but it's a very different movie and it's very Cronenberg at the same time, I don't think that Crimes of the Future would hit that, but I don't think it goes as far as it can. I think it's a great movie. It's just there's a lot of dialogue in that, and that's not necessarily I wouldn't say normal. It's not usual for the body horror period of his career, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
But again, independently funded, his movies flop. His only like 2 or 3 of his movies have ever made money, not at the box office. So many of his movies has flopped, and he really, really was saved by like physical sales and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Rentals and stuff.
The criticism about the body horror stuff, I mean, that, is it fair to say that's mostly from people in the horror community, though?
Yeah.
I wouldn't,
Yeah.
like there's people that love movies are going to watch those other movies like A History of Violence or Crimes of the Future, and they're going to appreciate that kind of stuff regardless of whether or not they've seen his body horror movies or not. So I feel like even that criticism is coming from I mean, I don't want to like pinpoint a certain group of people. I never want to do that, but I mean, to be fair, like it's really just coming from horror fans that somehow feel like, oh, like he's supposed to be our director, and now it's like, well, they go off to make
Yeah.
different movies and experiment with things creatively in a different genre, and suddenly it's like committing fucking sacrilege to some people. So I don't know. I wouldn't even really say that those are. I mean, yeah, it's a criticism, but I mean, I don't really think it's well justified to be
No,
fair.
for sure.
So,
Yeah, and it's like the perfect thing is like anybody that does art, right? Okay, take I think this is a great thing. Like sometimes we don't only want to talk about movies. Sometimes we'll branch out into TV shows. We'll branch out into talking about this. That's why I think our name is so great, because we aren't in a box. That's the same thought process with him. He doesn't want to only be the body horror genre guy. He wants to be known for his art. That's all he cares about. He wants to be remembered as having a stamp across cinema, not across one thing in cinema. And
well, the other
it's
thing, too,
nobody
is
likes being put in a
not like
box.
he's not making those movies and they're bad. Like they're actually good. Like
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
actually
yeah.
well-made movies. So it's
Yeah.
that's what I mean where I say that I don't think that criticism's really fair, because it's one
Yeah.
thing to say, okay, well, you know what, he tried experimenting in a different genre and the results
Right.
were mediocre at best. But I mean, those movies are fucking incredibly well done. So
Yep.
technically as well, I think they're executed very well. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just don't think it's fair for people to say that, because again, it's just not justified in saying, other than just getting upset because he's experimenting with something else other than body horror. So
Yep. Yeah, and that tends to be really, I guess, the main criticism I've seen. I mean, there's not a lot of people. You would think I've had more conversations than I have with people that are like really into Cronenberg, but people aren't necessarily really into his filmography that I've seen. They're really into specific movies, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
you'll find a lot of people that love Videodrome, but you'll also find just as many people that say, I've watched the movie once, I never need to see it again. You know
Right.
what I mean? I've seen that a lot. Like whenever the Criterion sale happens, people pick up Videodrome in 4K, watch it, and they're like, "Well, shit, that was pretty intense." I don't think I need to rewatch that anytime soon. So I don't think there's a lot of people that you'll find. Like you're not going to find a random person that's like, "Oh yeah, I've only seen Maps to the Stars by him." It's a great movie, but it's like not a lot of people really venture out of his past like 80s stuff. Like Crimes of the Future, dude, was like a $17 million budget. I think he made $2 million at the box office, man. His movies don't do well like that. But he's got a really like small cult following that's very rabid for him, with me being one of them. Like he just does things really great, man. Fun fact for those people, I know I've told you guys about this, but I want to throw this out while I wrap this up. And put yourself in the mind of an alternate reality on these movies. So there's a small list of movies that Cronenberg actually got close to making. And then some movies, like the last one I'll shout out, that he just got a call and just said, I don't want to do it. So he got super close and into production on directing Top Gun. And that's fucking crazy. Could you imagine the different movie that would have been?
That'd
That
be
is
kind of weird,
crazy.
bro.
Beverly Hills
wild.
Cop.
It'd be
Beverly,
wild.
like what would he do? Like I think it'd be great to see him do a comedy, because I started thinking about that. He has comedic elements, but his comedic elements are a lot in line with like Why Texas Chainsaw, the original one, is funny. It's like it's not necessarily for like non-morbid
General
reasons.
audience, yeah.
Yeah. But Beverly Hills Cop was one of them. Flashdance was another one that he almost went into production with. But one that he got a call, I found this out on, there's a YouTube interview of him going into a French video store and just picking out random movies.
Mhm.
and he picks up Star Wars Episode 6. And so he tells a story about, he's like, yeah, I got a call from Lucasfilm. He said the name of the person. I don't know if it was George Lucas, but somebody at Lucasfilm. He's like, I got a call from them, and they said that they would be interested in talking to David Cronenberg. I told them that's me. And they told me that they were interested in me directing Star Wars Episode 6. I told them that I don't direct other people's material. And then he said he immediately heard a click. Like,
Wow.
so, but just imagine like that Sarlacc pit, the Ewoks, all of that. Like, just really think, had he said yes, right? If he had said yes, the entire aspect, everything that we have after Return of the Jedi would be different. Just on a pure design level. The Sarlacc pit would have looked different. The Ewoks would have looked different, you know? Unless it just gets done a certain way, but you know that he wouldn't have rocked that way. If he would have made a movie, it would have had to been like been done by him, not just being
Yeah.
told what to do, you know?
I think that's why it's
'cause
so
he's never
hard to
made movies like
picture
that.
it, just because those are all movies with, like immense amounts of like corporate interference and movie studio
Yeah.
interference. So it's kind of hard for me to even picture like what Top Gun would look like or Return of the
It'd be
Jedi, because
crazy.
I'm like, yeah, I mean, it would look wonky for sure.
Yeah.
But I also can't picture him, succumbing to what Lucasfilm wants,
studio.
or
Yeah, he
or
won't.
what they
Yeah.
wanted for Top Gun. So it's crazy to think about, for sure. Those are some
Yeah.
quirky movies. Yeah, you were texting us those, and I'm like, I just can't. I can't. My brain can't register it, dude. I can't picture it.
Yeah.
I really can't.
It's just crazy. Like, I mean, with Top Gun, what are you gonna do? Like, I gotta have a crash in there somewhere, and I gotta be very explicit with it. Like, you know, and he's not
Goose
always
is gonna
about
get like some
danger.
intense like body operation or something.
Yeah, like a broken ankle and an intense
Yeah.
operation on it, showing everything. But yeah, it's just a lot of really fun what could have been. I know John Carpenter and some other people that we've talked about have done some like very interesting and like close to getting those types of things done types of movies.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
my love letter to David Cronenberg. So I'll pass it off to whoever wants to go next on their favorite director. I'm curious to
You
hear
can go with Will.
you guys
with
fanboy.
Carpenter, because I've been staring
Will?
at Carpenter's face this
John
whole
Carpenter.
time.
He's our fourth member.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, John. Thanks for being a part of Shelf. We appreciate you being here. You got to take a cigarette break. You can at any point. No, yeah, I guess I could talk about John Carpenter. I mean, it's funny because John Carpenter, I think he's up there with, I'd say, directors like Brian De Palma.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting to look at him because he was so his movies anyway were so widely known by the end of the 80s and the early 90s. Like even the ones that were released during the 80s but didn't necessarily get the commercial success that a lot of people feel like they deserved.
Mhm.
And there's different factors that influence some of those things, and we've talked about that in some episodes before. I think we've talked about movies like The Thing, developing a cult following later on in the decade in the 80s and then even into the 90s with the rise of home video and all that, and kind of finding a second life. But I just think Carpenter is one of those directors that I immediately gravitated towards as a kid. And a lot of it has to do with the way that I was raised. Like my dad showed me a lot of those movies, right? And like
Mhm.
Yeah.
Halloween was like one of the first horror movies I ever seen, so I love Halloween. It's one of my favorite films, but I also, when I was getting into filmmaking, John Carpenter was the first director that I could put I just the first director that I could associate with. He was like
Yeah.
the first face that I could see that it's like, okay, put a face to the name, right? And
Mhm.
it's funny because watching his movies as a kid, it's like, well, who is this guy? When you're younger, it's like you see their name above the credits, and it's it's almost intriguing. It's like I equate it to almost like listening to music when you're younger and you
Yeah.
discover like this band or like this artist that's like really mysterious and you want to know more about them, but you can't find pictures of them anywhere. And then finally it's like, oh, this is what this dude looks like. So Carpenter was just one of those guys that I started to read up on, when I was younger, getting into high school and being more interested in filmmaking in general. I just think he's somebody that I gravitated to because he was such an economical director in the sense that he was able to make so much work with his movies with such a little budget. And that's
Yeah.
really been the story of his
Mhm.
career. And in fact, it's been one of the big talking points amongst people who talk about the trajectory of his career because there's always a what if with John Carpenter. What if The Thing was actually successful and took off? He might have been working with actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and other people. I mean, even working with Sam Neill in that movie, The Mouth of Madness, which it has its critics. I don't think it's one of his best movies, but I think it's a neat little horror movie, and I think Sam Neill is fantastic in it. But some people would look at that movie and say, "Oh, it sucks." But I think after They Live, he definitely, I don't want to say fell off the map. I just don't think he had anything that came close to They Live in terms of its significance, right? Like
The
They Live,
cultural impact.
yeah, as far as like cultural impact or even just They Live, I think made a lot of interesting statements about the time that it was released, and that's the other thing too. I think a lot of his films don't necessarily, other than The Thing, other than Halloween. I think the argument can be made that a lot of his films don't necessarily stand the test of time, or you could look at them and say that they're products of their time,
Yeah,
right?
for
Because
sure.
I know a lot of people today that are younger than me, even people in the industry where I work in, and they say, I've seen the Carpenter stuff. I like Halloween. I like The Thing, but I wasn't really a fan of anything else. And I feel like that has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of his movies are very much products of their time, right? And they don't always have qualities that a lot of people look for that kind of transcend that. I mean, They Live, you
Yeah.
can make the argument that is it a cult movie? Of course it is. I think most of his movies have achieved cult status. I'm not talking about the stuff that he made later, like his. I think the last movie that he made that I really enjoyed was Vampires, and that was probably the late '90s when Vampires came out, '97
Yeah.
or '98 or
97.
sometime around there. But yeah, I mean, let me get into what I like about his movies first, and then we'll talk about some of that other stuff because starting to get into that, but I don't want to. I don't want to go off course. But as far as his techniques, because Chase, I don't know if you guys want to get into that as well. I know you talked a lot about Cronenberg, but I'll talk about what I like about Carpenter that he does with his movies that I think he does well.
Yeah.
And I mean it's a little bit of a list here, but I'll kind of run down it because I was thinking as you guys were talking about Cronenberg and trying to break down what it is that I actually like about his movies technically. I like the use of, like, for example, in Halloween, and he does this in Assault on Precinct 13. He does this in The Thing as well. He tends to use a lot of long shots to establish the geography of a movie or the setting in which
Yeah.
that movie is going to take place incredibly well. I think Halloween, the scene in the beginning, although it is a POV shot, it's a nice long steady cam shot of Michael as a kid walking through the house. Not only is he establishing the setting of that movie, but he establishes the tone and the suspense of that movie right away. Right. So right away it feels uncomfortable. You don't know what's happening. Then you see the sister changing, and we know what happens after that. And then you find out, oh, damn, it's like a little kid, you know? That's taking something that people are thinking, oh, okay, this is a stalker running through the house here, but it turns out it's actually her brother, So it's using those long, steady, in most cases, from what I'm thinking, even in The Thing, I'm pretty sure it was a steady cam for that as well when they're going through where they're showing you the base. That's all a steady cam shot. So he tends to gravitate towards shots like that again, very long, not a lot of cuts to establish the setting. And I think he does that very well. I think he knows how to frame, at least again, when we're talking about like the pivotal works like The Thing, Halloween, even in They Live, just using framing and camera setups to generate suspense, right?
He does that a
Another
lot in
big
Christine
example.
too.
Christine is a
Yeah, Christine's a
perfect
good one.
example of that,
Yeah.
especially with the shots of the car. And then
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think like Christine is probably the best example of that. There's moments of that, I think, in Halloween that are really well done. Like one of the
Yeah.
infamous ones, and everyone will know this when Laurie Strode's in the hallway and you see the frame, it holds on her and the doors in the background, and you see the mask in the shadow of the doorway. That's a popular example of that people will most likely relate to. Everybody's seen that. But yeah,
It
I
creates a
think
lot of
Christine,
paranoia though. Like, oh, go ahead, man.
that's actually what I was gonna say. It creates that sense of paranoia, which in the scores of his movies, I think, help with that as well. There's something about like those electronic, like synth scores that he's so he's so good at
Mhm.
producing. They just help to elevate not only the atmosphere in his movies, which he's also very good at. We didn't really get into that yet. I was going to get into that next, but it just kind of elevates that whole sense of paranoia. I mean, with The Thing, it's a perfect example of that. That opening sequence with the dog being chased around, and you just hear that music. And granted, that's Ennio Morricone who produced that, and it wasn't necessarily Carpenter for that particular film. But again, I think the use of music, it's very similar to something that Carpenter would produce,
Yeah.
right? But with Halloween, we know that. But all of his films tend to have like this very, almost like this dark, atmospheric, electronic synth score to them. And he's just so good at that kind of stuff. I don't know what it is. It's like he's the one director that found something that worked very well, and he was able to replicate that through a variety of his movies. Again, not all perfect, but like The Fog, I think, is another example of that. I mean, those movies would not be what they are without their soundtracks. I mean, the soundtracks are such a big part of it. And for him to not only be directing and assisting with the cinematography, but also producing a lot of the music, I think there's not a lot of directors that do that. You see
Yeah.
directors that write and produce their movies or write and direct. Robert Rodriguez is someone that people always reference. It's like, well, Robert Rodriguez, he edited, he produced, he directed, like El Mariachi, for an example. But I think Carpenter being able to do that for so long, I think is a testament to his, not only his talent, but just his intellect as a director, to know exactly what he wants and to just be able to hone in on that. And for the most part, I think from Halloween all the way up until They Live, I mean, he had quite a run. Even Big Trouble in Little China, Big Trouble in Little China is not a movie that everybody gets. Like Chase, I
It's
think you
fun.
watched it, and
Yeah, a
it's
I
few
a
months
still
fun
have to
movie.
watch it, dude.
Yeah.
I still have
It's
to
a
watch
fun
it.
movie. Again, also very ahead of its time. I think a lot of his movies do not get enough credit. Like, everybody looks at Big Trouble in Little China, and you could look at it and say, okay, it's a fun movie, like at face value. But I think there's a lot of themes in that movie that he plays with that he kind of turns on their side and screws around with in an interesting way. Like, for example, the whole idea of Kurt Russell's character not actually being the main character. He's actually like the sidekick. And it's Dennis Dunn's character. I believe his name's Wang in the movie. He's actually the hero. He's actually the leading man. Kurt Russell's kind of like, the
Little
American
side.
guy who's
Yeah.
kind of like brash, and he kind of gives off that tough guy persona. But every
It's so
time they
fun.
get into a scuffle, he's actually the one who takes a back seat. It's Wang who's running around kicking everybody's ass, and Jack Burton's kind of just there like for like comic relief, right?
Yeah.
And I remember reading an interview of Carpenter where he said, people hated that. The studio hated that. They hated that he made, Jack Burton, Kurt Russell's character, kind of like the punching bag, because they expected, he's going to come in. He's like the John Wayne-esque guy. And then he's got like Wang as like his sidekick who knows martial arts and he helps him. But it was completely the other way around. It was Kurt Russell's character being kind of like the fall guy who is kind of thrown into the situation and is pretty naive to a lot of what's happening in this world. He's kind of
Yeah.
learning as he goes, but dude, people kind of looked at that as, oh, well, he's making like a mockery of like the Hollywood action hero, but it was just taking that idea and subverting it and turning it on its side. I think that was a unique approach to the whole, I mean, I don't know what you would call it, like the buddy cop, I guess the buddy cop motif, right? Or the action duo, so to speak. But again, not something that you saw at the time. If you look at other movies that were coming out around that time period, nobody was doing something like that. He took a chance with that dynamic and said, you know what? I'm going to make Jack Burton a hero by the end of the movie. People are going to warm up to him because of his personality and his humor, but not so much because of what traditionally people look for in an action hero, right?
No,
So
absolutely.
I think that's a perfect example of just him taking a chance and just having the balls to do something a little different than everyone else, and really paying the price for it. Like I said, Big Trouble in Little China was not a financial success. And I think I think he paid the price for that, but he stuck to his guns anyway. And talking to him, you could talk to him today, and he'll tell you, he wouldn't change a damn thing. And that's what I respect about John Carpenter is his attitude. He can be a little rough around the edges, in interviews. And Chase, I don't know if that's what you were alluding to before we rolled, because I've definitely seen a lot of his interviews where, people challenge some of his creative choices. Let's put it that way, and he'll give it right to you, so he doesn't care. But I mean, at the same time, I respect him. But it's hard for, I think, a director to sit there and take criticism sometimes. And I can understand why some people are the way they are about that. It can be a sore spot for discussion, especially when you have a movie like, again, we talked about like Escape from LA. I mean, that movie to me it's a fun movie. It's a great movie, but like technically it's by no means anywhere near, I think, as great as something like The Thing. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think he does a lot right with his movies. I think he's gotten a bad rap from Hollywood, and he's gone on to talk about this in interviews, how, he had plans to like do bigger and better things, and he would have done bigger budget movies if The Thing was more successful. If he had gotten more recognition for that, which obviously came years later. But even with that, he hasn't really enjoyed the type of career and he hasn't really, at least when he was on fire, like when he was on his run, like in the 80s, late 70s and the 80s, he wasn't really getting the same success or seeing the same success as his contemporaries, like directors like Brian De Palma, who I think achieved that success. Right. And Brian De Palma, like I love Brian De Palma too. Speaking of, he's probably, I would put him up there with Carpenter as far as directors that I look to, not only for inspiration, but just directors that I've always loved. Like I love De Palma's movies, although not perfect. I would consider him mostly on the same level of Carpenter, because you can look at a lot of their movies and say, well, some of these movies, some people look at them and say, well, this is mostly like they make B movies or like schlocky movies that have achieved kind of like this cult status. The same argument can be made for De Palma, but then again, De Palma's enjoyed much more commercial success
massively
than Carpenter, I would argue. So, but I pretty much put him on the same level, at least during that period of the 80s when Carpenter was putting out all those movies, They Live, Big Trouble in Little China, The Thing. I would say that he was pretty much right there with De Palma. So just to kind of compare that. But as far as, because we talked about, what you guys are probably going to ask me what I don't like about his movies. It's not that I necessarily don't like anything about his films. I just know what he tends to, I guess, have, or where he has vulnerabilities, I'll say. And I think that in some of his movies, the argument can be made that they have great premises, or that the premise is great, but he never really builds up to that or lives up to that with some of his movies. I've heard that said about Escape from New York, which, I mean, I think Escape from New York is a great movie. I don't personally agree with it. When I watch Escape from New York, I think it's great, but I can understand people watching that and saying, oh, it doesn't really have a payoff, right? Like the premise never really pays off. I've heard that argument made, and I can see that with some of his films. Not so much The Thing or Halloween, but I can understand why people would make that criticism. So
I think that's a really great point. Like when it comes to Carpenter, the one thing I would say, I wouldn't say I disagree with the execution. The Thing executes well. I think I just like the vibe of like the escape movies. I think they're really awesome. I think he's really, really great at giving you a really cool singular character. Like not necessarily like Big Trouble in Little China, Wang and Jack are great. But the thing is like he'll come up with a great identity for one character, but never build it up properly, if that makes sense. So like he does a good job in certain ones, but Laurie Strode is Laurie Strode with really just getting more scared as the movie goes on. Jack Burton is Jack Burton throughout the entire thing. Roddy Piper in They Live, he's just arrogant and cocky from the beginning to the very end. And I think that might be like the most that you get because he becomes a little bit more self-aware. But they're very stagnant characters, but you still like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
but
weird.
They're
It's
really
like
great.
they still have like this. Here's the thing that works for them, and I agree with that. There's not necessarily layers to a lot of those characters,
Yes.
and that's
Just
also a
cool.
criticism that he
Mhm.
gets. Like Snake Plissken is, oh, he's a badass,
Yeah.
but that's it. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
one redeeming quality that Snake has is at the end he throws away the tape. But even then, people are like, well, why is he doing that? Like, why did he throw away the tape? Because it's just a big fuck you to everybody, and that's pretty much Snake. I would argue that Laurie goes through some growth as a character by the end of the movie, because when it comes to, like, particularly, I'm remembering it, the scene in the hallway
Yeah.
when she gets Tommy and Lindsay together, and she's like, "Hey, I
Mhm.
need you
Yeah.
guys to do this for me." Like, I kind of see that as, okay, she's in the situation, like she's now starting to take control of the situation and be, the adult figure and be strong for them. And it's like, okay, I need you to run across the street and let whoever know that, they're here. I need you to get out of here, go hide,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
whatever it is that she says to them. So there's a little bit of growth there, or a little bit of an arc, I guess we could say. But yeah, that is something that I thought about for a while. Like with They Live, you're right.
Mhm.
It's pretty much you get the same character for the most part of the movie, for the run of that
Yeah.
movie, but it's weird because
It just works,
they're
you
still
know?
relatable though.
It
That's the thing.
works
Yes.
It's
it
like you're
works
still
because
kind
it's
of
like
rooting for them.
you're rooting for them, but, like, also, like, I think with Carpenter, the thing I appreciate about him is, like, you're almost just like the tracking shot in Halloween, right? It's like you're observing, like, you're an like this, like, force, like, outside of the film, like, observing these characters, like you're like
Mm,
you're just observing what happens, and you're just constantly thinking like, shit, what would I do in that situation? At least for
yeah,
Halloween, that's how I felt like watching it. It's like, what would I do in that situation with the kids in the house and this and that, and even with the Thing, where it's like, shit, you don't know
yeah,
who it is, right? It's like, so what would I do in that situation? I think a lot of his movies, like, you're putting in these scenarios where it's like there isn't really room for character development, because you're just in a
right,
situation where it's like, what do I do and how do I get out of this? And
yeah,
you're just an observer, and that's what I appreciate about Carpenter. I
Yeah.
don't I agree with your criticism, Chase, that it's like you can say that there's not a lot of character development, but I think with Carpenter's movies, you're just kind of an observer, and you're just constantly
Yeah.
thinking like, what am I doing? What would I do if I was Laurie Strode? You know what I mean? What would
yeah,
I do if I was in a situation with The Thing, or even Christine? Or, I mean, you guys are talking about Escape from LA. I haven't seen that one in a minute, but it's like, yeah, I mean, like, he's just a badass. Like, Snake's just a
Yeah.
badass in that movie. It's
Yeah,
just
that's
like
it.
yeah,
that's the purpose he serves, and we're just like an audience. We're just there to observe, and not so much like experience an arc with these characters, but
mm,
really just observe
Just
and
have
just
fun.
kind of absorb the
Yeah.
experience. Yeah, and just like question like, what would we have done in that situation? So that's what I
yeah.
appreciate about Carpenter.
I think with some of the movies too, like The Thing, for example, it's more about the situation that those characters
Hmm.
are dealing with, and more so their interactions with each other. That's more of the focal point of a movie like The Thing, right? Like all those characters, for the most part, they're who they are, in The Thing.
Yeah.
They're just trying to survive. Like that becomes
Yeah.
the goal is survival, and obviously I mean, that's a perfect example of, I guess we could say, an apocalyptic situation where, everyone's just doing what they can to make sure that they don't get, bit, or that they're not the ones that are
Yeah.
infected in that case. Right. So it's more so, it's not necessarily, I don't think his films in some cases are meant to really explore a character arc, but more so put a characters in a situation, put them in this environment, and see what happens, right? Like
Yeah.
that seems to be more the thought process behind it. But I
And
want to get your guys' opinion on this. There is one other thing that I thought of too, and like even thinking about a movie like The Thing, like there's small moments that I think he does so well with, where it's almost like the release of tension, like comedic relief. I think the humor in
Mhm.
his movies is something that a lot of people overlook. Like I think it's the scene in The Thing where I forget the other character's name, but the head falls off the table, and like
Yeah.
the spider head, and it's
Mhm.
kind of walking away in the background. Like, and people are like, oh, it looks kind of goofy. Like, I think it's intentional. It's intentional that it looks goofy and that it's kind of like creeping
Yeah,
away
Mhm.
exactly.
in the background. And then I think it's like Palmer's character, whoever plays him, he turns around and he's like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Like that just makes
Yeah.
me laugh when I hear that, because it's so ridiculous to begin with, and the situation that these characters are in is so
Right.
over the top.
A
I
whole
think he
bunch of the
also
quotes Kurt
knows.
Russell has in that movie are just
Oh,
over
of
the top and
course,
ridiculous and funny.
but it's
Yeah.
like, he does really well with. It's weird. It's like this combination of like cynicism that he has in or his
Mhm.
approach to that in his movies, and that combination of like that cynicism that's present in some of those movies, like The Thing or An Escape from New York, and They Live, with the humor. It just works so well,
Yeah.
and I think it's partly because these characters are kind of in these situations, and I just think he does a great job with that. I don't think that's something that people talk about because everyone's like, "Oh, he's great at this. He's great at atmosphere."
Yeah.
But I wanted to point out the humor in some of his movies because I think that's something that's overlooked in a lot of cases. So,
There was an interview with Tarantino that he was exploring John Carpenter and like what
mm,
I guess like John Carpenter is like a huge influence on Tarantino because if you think about like Hateful Eight or oh my god, dude, I'm blanking out. What's the first movie he did?
Reservoir.
Reservoir
Reservoir
Dogs.
Dogs.
Yeah, he said he just loves the fact that Carpenter puts people in situations, and he's not concerned about like like getting through an arc or like a story. He just wants to throw people in
Mm,
situations and see what happens. And he says that
Yeah.
that's what a huge
Survive.
influence like
that's
for
funny.
Reservoir Dogs and Hateful Eight. It's not about these characters changing. It's just like you have all these different characters and they're stuck. And it's like, let's have at it. Let's just see what happens. And that's what Tarantino says he loves about John Carpenter so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
And he's still like, I mean, again, I don't think like everyone talks about Scorsese and
Mhm.
Coppola and all these other directors, like even De Palma. Like I said, I love De Palma, but the reason I mentioned De Palma specifically is because De Palma was putting out like fire movies, like great movies along the
Yeah.
same time or during the same time that Carpenter had all these movies in the 80s. And De Palma gets the awards, and he's gotten that recognition, and Carpenter's never
Mhm.
quite gotten that, but I think his movies are just as influential. Like even a movie like what was on the other day, like The Purge was on the other night. We were at the hotel, I was away for a couple days, and the one of the Purge movies was on TV. Like when I see The Purge, like to me The Purge that's like Assault on Precinct 13 with
Oh, yeah,
and
it's
there's
exactly it's
also
all Precinct
it's like
13.
the same thing, and there's also, there's certain moments in those movies where it reminds you of, like, Escape from New York as well, where it's just this
Mhm.
chaotic, like, apocalyptic type of atmosphere, and I think Escape from New York does that incredibly well.
And I think that's what
Um
he encompasses, man. I think he's just really good at if we're like, processing and analyzing all like his filmography, it's like
mm,
they're really just films like saying like, "Hey, here's the situation and
yeah,
what do you do in this situation?" And he wants to explore that, in terms of not developing the characters, but just like, as human beings, what would you do? And
mm,
that's the experience I get from watching John Carpenter movies.
yeah,
Yeah. He's a
yeah,
solid director, dude. He's fantastic, and honestly, I mean, we didn't even talk about, his. I think a lot of his movies have some of like the most classic use of prosthetic effects. Like The Thing is still like to me
oh, yeah, for sure.
like the holy grail of prosthetic effects and what you can do with that. But I agree with everything that you said. I think kind of Brian De Palma, a fantastic director, but he was definitely like overshadowed by Del Palma
Mm,
during that time. And I hate saying like rightfully so, but I mean he was putting out, like you said, banger after banger, and you
mm,
know John Carpenter was kind of put to the side a little bit. But I think that over time
yeah,
he's developed that cult following for a reason because people do
yeah,
love his work so much.
What is
yeah.
Carpenter's highest grossing movie?
I
That's a good question. I think
Yeah.
I wanna say it might be dude, it might be Halloween as
Because I'd
far
have to
as.
imagine like video sales. Because I'd have to imagine
Oh, yeah, if you're
he,
talking video sales.
yeah. Because I wish there was
One
better
second, guys.
reporting on that. There's some that come and go whenever it comes to it, but the thing is like Cronenberg, a lot of his movies would just fucking kill it at rental stores, man. Just
Right.
fucking kill it. So like that's obviously why he kept making movies. A lot of his movies didn't turn a profit. Like it's actually eerily similar between two great minds in their own respective genres and what they're doing. Like they didn't find the box office success that they were looking for. I'd say John Carpenter
Yeah.
is a little bit more of a closer study because he had bigger budgets on a lot of his stuff. Like I want to say
On
Big
this on
Trouble
the
was like
later
30
on the
mil.
latter stuff, he had bigger budgets.
Yeah.
I think, well, I would argue so Yeah, it's tough with video sales because, like, I'm trying to think what he had in the late '80s. He had like Prince of Darkness, which I don't think did that well.
Let's see.
That
I'm
one
looking now.
flew under the radar. He did an Invisible Man movie in the early '90s. I don't know if
Oh
that one
wow, it
really
actually
achieved a lot of
did.
success.
To throw out there for you, Prince of Darkness. It's actually surprising me, man. So that movie had a $3 million budget. So assume 6 million. It made 14.2. So I mean, it made money. Same with Christine. Budget of 10 million, did 21.
I
Yeah,
was
I'd
gonna say maybe
say
Christine is the top. What did you guys find out which one the top one
no.
was?
I think Escape from New York probably made. I would say Escape from New York made more than Christine
Yeah,
because
6 mil to 25 mil.
Mm,
I mean, I still think Halloween's probably the biggest gross, though. It has to be
Yeah,
because Halloween took off.
$325,000 budget.
yeah.
70
Yeah.
million box office, and that's assuming it's accurate because you could have a similar thing. It wasn't owned by the cartel like Texas Chainsaw, but you'd have to assume it made a shit ton more. You know what I mean? Like 70
Yeah.
million,
Well,
you start thinking about like how much money does he get for having
yeah.
this IP, merchandising, all of
Mm.
the expos that he's done. I mean, that one movie, you know.
Mhm.
Well, Halloween could, yeah, he could, yeah. I mean, he has the most of his majority of his life, up until this point, it has probably been mostly from Halloween. But I'm very interested, and again, you brought up an interesting point, Chase. I don't know how much data there is to support this, or that's available even. But I'm curious to see how the thing, because we know that the thing did well on home video because that's pretty much where it became. It's how it became a cult film. It was years later on home video through the rental stores and then into the late '80s, into the early '90s. Because I've heard him talk about that personally in interviews, and I've also, that information's been out there. But I would be curious to see like how well it sold on home video. VHS, even DVD, but we're talking before Blu-ray,
No, absolutely.
I'd be
Yeah, because
curious.
VHSs were so much more expensive then.
Mhm.
Like
They
it had a
were.
budget of 15 million, box office
Mhm.
19.9 million, which that's not
Yeah.
even his biggest flop. His biggest flop was Memoirs of an Invisible Man. It had a budget of 40 million and only did 14.4.
Yeah, that's the
I've
one
never
I was
seen that
thinking
one.
of. That was
Yeah.
early '90s. That's it's not that good.
Yeah,
Put it that
post
way, but
release, it doesn't actually really say because sometimes whenever you go to the post release section on Wikipedia, you
mm,
can find like this literally has a home media section, and
mm,
sometimes it'll say on there like there's one for the Lost Boys, and it says that it made like over $10 million on home media once it was released.
oh wow.
There's nothing for that, and I really wish that there were sites to be able to see this because that could be monumental. Some movies on VHS could have done 30-40 million dollars on just rentals alone for a
Right.
30-year span. It's
Yeah.
it's insane the amount of money, and I think it's a great because we specialize in physical media here as well as we just generalized films. It's quite crazy how much if a movie bombed, they would say fuck it, put it on
Mm,
home media, and they'd recoup their money a lot of the times whenever it came to certain types of movies. The Thing
right.
being one of them. That thing easily made money after the fact, depending on how they went about it. So Carpenter's got very interesting filmography. A lot of his stuff in the early and mid years made money, and then it really just started to go downhill around the time that you were describing earlier. So it's a very interesting case study with him for sure.
Mm,
One of the greats. I
Good
agree with
pick.
you in every way. I've seen
Yeah.
all of his movies except for a few: The Invisible Man, Ghost of Mars, Vampires. I've even seen that really bad one called The Ward with Amber Heard. The movie was
yeah, that was
terrible.
like that was
That
like in the
was
2000s, right? Yeah, that was bad.
yeah.
That
2010.
was bad.
Yeah, that was. I like the idea of it. It's just like it felt like a script that he wrote 40 years ago, but just got the chance to make.
Mm,
It would have
He
been
stopped
good had it
caring.
came out in the 70s. It would have worked. It
mm,
would have had that grainy charm to it, that campiness. But in 2010, it just hits a little bit weirder, and it
mm.
just wasn't good. But yeah, solid pick with John Carpenter. And I don't know if you mentioned this or if I just completely missed it. I apologize if I do, but his scores are so iconic.
Oh
That's
yeah.
another reason I consider him one of the best because to write some of your movies like he has and to
Mhm.
direct them and to make your music for it, it just takes a very, very intelligent individual to have three rivers running in your head at the same time.
Yeah,
That's
I alluded
crazy.
to that too. The fact that again, I think that helped make his movies so much better than they would have been, right?
Yeah.
Without that, because it's one thing to bring someone else to do your soundtrack or your score for you, or to score your movie for you. Like he did that with The Thing, with
Yeah.
Ennio Morricone. But I think at that point, that's the one instance where I can think of where someone else scored the movie. I mean, for the most part, he did everything
It's
regarding that.
crazy.
So there's not many directors out there that can do that, and
Yeah.
him having that talent, musical talent, as well as being able to, visually, being a visual storyteller is great. It's not something that we've seen at all, really. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Very well
Yeah.
said. And I'm pretty sure Gabe's about to talk about Quentin Tarantino right now.
Of
yeah,
course.
well, I think it's
Yeah.
time, everybody, that we each get our copies where we can find them, whether it's The Dark Knight or maybe The Prestige or something, and get ready, everyone, to worship, because the next
Of
30
course,
minutes
man.
is going to be about we have to be ready to bow down to the king,
To the
the
king of cinema.
the true king of cinema,
Yeah. I mean,
the king of
it's
peak.
it's hard, man, because like there are directors that obviously I could say like objectively like Martin Scorsese and Tarantino and stuff like that they are just maybe objectively like better directors and come up with better films, but there's something like personal with Nolan that kind of hit me, and I already did the kind of that Nolan ranking video where I kind of described how I got into Nolan, and in case people haven't heard that, quick rundown, I was introduced to the movie Insomnia with Al Pacino and Robin Williams and Hilary Swank. That was one of like the first movies I got on DVD when I started collecting like physical media as a teenager, and it was just like a random movie that my parents had bought, and I watched it, and I don't know what the hell's wrong with me at 13 years old thinking that movie's like the shit. It's some murder mystery, but I just loved it. I really really enjoyed it. And growing up as a teenager, I was a big Batman fan. I had like comic books, boxes of them, and graphic novels. And when I heard the same guy that was making Insomnia was directing Batman Begins, I just got super excited. And when I walked out of Batman Begins, I'm like, that was like a completely different experience for me. At least
Hell
at
yeah.
least as a Batman fan, and just even a film nerd in general, just because we hadn't seen something like that where it was, you have this kind of fantastic material that was like so grounded and dark. um, and that's when I started getting into Nolan, man. And I think with Nolan, it's definitely a more personal thing for me. I think with him, he is a film fanatic at heart. He is like a cinephile. There
Yeah.
is the same video I think that you were talking about, Chase, with Cronenberg and that French video store. They
He
did
did
it
one?
with yeah, they did it with Nolan. And dude,
That's sick.
Nolan, if you watch it, like he's pulling movies off the shelf that I'm like, I don't even know what this movie is. It's like 1932, 1947, and it's
Yeah.
like I don't know what half of these movies are, but he's talking about how he goes back to watch these older movies, even like silent films that are not even finished, just to get ideas of how to incorporate stuff in like more modern movies he's doing, like Oppenheimer or Dunkirk. And it's like so interesting, like looking at his method for when he's starting a new movie, because he just goes back to the basics, like just these old school films that people have either forgotten about or don't know about. And he goes through them and jots down ideas and ways to kind of incorporate it in a modern sense. I think he's kind of overshadowed a little bit just because he's had a lot of like big budget blockbuster movies. But I think
A lot. Yeah.
honestly, yeah, I mean, obviously the Batman trilogy, I think that's kind of like what took him off. But I think he's just always been like a cinema fanatic at heart. There was a
Yeah.
story I heard with his wife. So like the way he actually got Batman was his wife got a call from Warner Brothers, and they were like, "Hey, they're asking if you maybe want to do a Batman movie." But I told them no because I didn't think that's up your alley. Like, you're trying all this other unique stuff. So I told him no, and he's like, "Why did you tell him no?" He's like, "I totally want to do a Batman movie." He's like, "I can do something different with it that we haven't done before." And he actually had to scramble with Emma Thomas, his wife, to call Warner Brothers and was like, "Yeah, like I actually want to do this." So they
Hmm.
almost passed the
What a
opportunity
That's crazy.
to do it. But yeah, his wife was like, "No, I know Chris doesn't want to do this," because that is kind of he is a film fanatic at heart. He loves Kubrick. He loves older movies. Like that's just his thing. So the idea of him doing a Batman movie was just kind of foreign to his own wife. But he picked up those movies, man. And I think he did something that we hadn't seen before. Like I think he not only delivers really good narrative, but he also is interested in advancing the ways that we look at a movie. So like the whole IMAX phenomenon, I mean, that was him, with The Dark
Yeah.
Knight. And I remember seeing that movie. It's 70 millimeter IMAX, and the freaking opening shot with that, the Chicago skyscraper just zooming in, and I'm like, holy shit, this is incredible. And
Crazy.
no one's ever thought of using IMAX technology for just a regular movie. So I think he's really good at just keeping a lot of kind of like his love for cinema in his movies, but he's just kind of utilizing big budgets to do it. And I think he gets overshadowed by that a little bit. I mean, after the Dark Knight trilogy, I mean, we get like Inception, we get Dunkirk, we get Oppenheimer. I mean, like for Oppenheimer, he's like, hey, can we do, a black and white IMAX print? And Kodak's like, that doesn't exist. He's like, well, let's let's try and make it happen. And it's just so cool that he does stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I appreciate him so much, is that in a way like Cronenberg, I mean, I think Cronenberg definitely has more diversity with his filmography, but I think Nolan is getting to the stage in his career where he's starting to kind of explore different genres and different things that he's wanting to do. I mean, Dunkirk was so different from anything he had done. Oppenheimer so different from anything that he had done. I think he's breaking away from that kind of comic book sci-fi stamp that those big budget movies had put on him. And I'm hoping, I mean, I'm hearing that he's maybe doing a horror movie next. I'm not sure.
I was going to
Which would
ask
be
you
kind
that.
of
Yeah.
trippy.
That's what I've
Yeah.
heard. That'd be
He
really
said
great.
he
I
would.
would love
He
to
said he
see
would
that.
love to do a horror movie. He just says it's difficult to execute.
Do something different.
Yeah, it's difficult to execute. So he says he's not opposed and he would love doing it. And I just respect the dude too, because he's not only directing these movies, he's writing them as well. Like every single, outside of Insomnia, every single film he's done, he's written the screenplay for. So he's just, he's just super passionate about movies, and just the way they're shot, dude. Like the cinematography he uses, it's just, and a lot of them are obviously like the DPs he hires. I mean, he has a Hoyte Van, I can never say the dude's name, on a lot of the last movies, but some of the trippy stuff he does, and even like Inception with that rotating hallway, it's like stuff that you've never seen before or experienced. It's a big budget movie, but it's, if you strip that all down, if you strip the big budgets down, it's really just kind of like, cinephile's dream, just to kind of put something like that on the screen. He's like very experimental with the things he does, even though he has those big budgets to kind of support him. And people have asked him if he would ever go down and do kind of a more like smaller budget independent movie again. And his response was, why? He's like, if I have the budget to, I got the money to do, these quirky, crazy ideas. And if if I want to do them, it's like, why wouldn't I, utilize that resource if I have it, at my disposal? So I think Oppenheimer is a good example of that. You know what I mean? Where he's telling this freaking incredible story and he's utilizing a big budget to do it. And he executes so well, man. I mean, it's just something I haven't seen before, and it's something that it just kind of, it resonated with me, obviously, because the Dark Knight trilogy and Insomnia, because I love Insomnia before any of those other movies came out. But I think he's just had hit after hit after hit, and he's just not afraid to kind of explore different genres and do different things. And the IMAX thing now, I mean, it's a staple because of him. That's why we get, all these movies coming out in IMAX, is because of, the work he's done. So I'm trying to think of other stuff with him, man, that I really appreciate. His scores are fantastic. I think all of his movies have like these unique scores that you just don't get with a lot of other directors nowadays. And I think it's, his process with that is, from what I've read, he goes to the composer and he just tells them not what the movie is about, but just themes about the movie. So that like in Interstellar, you get that weird kind of organ symphony kind of horror music that kind of happens with the space station. And he just told Hans Zimmer, like, hey, this is a movie about, a father trying to get back to his daughter. And like, he just goes through the themes, like general themes of what the movie's about, and he lets the composer do their thing, and then he just slaps the music on. And he's very kind of, he doesn't really intervene that much with his actors. I heard you talking about Cronenberg, Chase, with hiring actors that he doesn't feel like he needs to intervene on. And I think Gary Oldman, who's done a lot of movies with Nolan, said he only got one piece of directing advice from Nolan in all the movies he's done. I think he's been in probably at least like 6 of his movies. And the only piece of directing advice, he just kind of went in and said, like, there's a lot more at stake. I think it was in The Dark Knight Rises that he had said a line, he had stopped him. He's like, hey, there's a lot more at stake. And he just kind of backed off and let him do his thing. And that was the only piece of directing advice that Nolan ever gave him throughout the whole time he had been working with him. So I think he's
It's
really good
crazy.
at spotting talent and letting them do their thing, and he knows what
Oh,
he
yeah.
wants, man. He's just a really talented director, and he's someone that I think he's still kind of just really early on in his career too. That's why it's hard to talk about him at length, just because he hasn't been out that long. I don't know if you guys have seen The Following. That was like his first like independent movie that he saved $10,000 of his own money for to
Yeah.
film. It's on the
That was
Criterion
prior
Collection.
to that was like the first movie he ever did, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Following,
And
I
right?
wanted to ask you
yeah,
who his casting director is also, Gabe, because that's something that I was going to mention to you. I think out of any director working today, he has been the most consistent with his casting. Like, there's never
yeah.
bad performances in any of his movies. Like, whoever his casting director is,
I
I mean,
think I know
he
Emma
tends to
Thomas
work
is
with a lot of
involved.
the
Like
same
his wife's
actors.
involved in a lot of the casting, but I don't think she's the same casting director. But yeah, I think he does have a talent for spotting like who he wants to work with. I mean, he has his
Mm,
recurring people like, Cillian Murphy and
mm,
Christian Bale's been in a few of his movies. Gary Oldman's been a lot. Michael Caine. So I mean, he's utilized a lot of the same actors, kind of like Cronenberg
yeah.
has. But he's definitely really good at spotting talent. Like when they announced, who was it? The dude in Dunkirk was from that one pop music group.
Harry Styles.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, Harry Styles.
I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
Harry Styles is going to be in this movie,
Yeah,
dude. I
man.
was like, what the hell's wrong with you? And
Did he do
he
a
did
good
a
job in that movie?
fantastic job. Yeah,
He
Did he?
did
he does a
great.
fantastic job, dude. And it's like it's he really does have an eye for talent and what people can kind of do. But
Mm.
yeah, it's hard to talk about him, dude, because I feel like he's just so early on in his career. He really only has like, if you look at his filmography, let me see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Almost a dozen movies now, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he's at a dozen movies right now, and it's like
How old is he?
he's in his 50s, I believe. I could be
Jesus,
So
wrong.
he's still got years ahead.
Yeah, man. I
I
mean, he's gonna
agree
be doing
too
this for a
with
while.
I think Dunkirk was like the sign, like that Dunkirk
Mhm.
was the beginning of the next chapter for his career, right? And I agree with that statement 110%, because like when I remember seeing Dunkirk and going like, wow, this is
Mhm.
actually like this is great. Not that his other movies weren't good, but
Yeah.
again, they were kind of still stuck in that mold of what he was known for, for
Mhm.
so long. So it was so nice to see him, tackle a subject that was so different. So that's what I appreciated about Dunkirk, because I think that was the first movie where it was more about, you know what, I'm just going to do what speaks to me cinematically and not worry about, like, he was kind of like breaking away from that mold of what everyone, knew him
Yeah.
as,
The
as
sci-fi
far as what a
Comic-Con crowd.
director. Yeah. So, and that was great. And obviously, Oppenheimer, I mean, we can talk about that all day. I think Oppenheimer's probably one of, if not, I mean, I would argue it's probably the best movie he's made.
Yeah, I
Um,
did his ranking. I kind of Dunkirk was at my top the whole time, just because I felt like
mm,
that was the movie where he broke off, and like you watch Dunkirk in the first 30 minutes of it. I don't think there's much dialogue, if any, the first like
it's
20 30 minutes of Dunkirk,
an
which is really
incredible
interesting.
use of sound with that movie too. I mean,
Yeah.
the stuff that he experimented with, and that's the thing, man. It's like a lot of the stuff is not conventional, and it's like that's
Hmm.
what I kind of appreciate about Nolan. And he's also he's earned the right to do this because his movies have achieved monumental success. But even with big budgets, right? There would
Hmm.
be a lot of directors that would be very nervous to do or hesitant to do some of the things that he's chosen to do creatively in terms of his narrative structure,
Yeah.
in terms of how the movie's presented, like with Dunkirk, with like the very little dialogue and the use of sound. I mean, I think nowadays that although that's more accepted, it's still a huge risk to be able to do that. And the fact that he's always kind of, gravitated towards doing things differently than everybody else is always, I got to
Yeah.
respect him for that too.
I think that, and didn't bring that up, which is a huge point, the narrative structure in a lot of his movies, right? With like
Mm,
Memento and things kind of being out of order. And he implements that in
mm,
Dunkirk so well too, where it's like that movie is
mhm.
completely out of order. But when you walk out of it, you're like, that was a great way to do it. You know what I mean? Just to
Yeah.
get different perspectives from the war. And I just respect him so much for being able to do stuff like that. Not only like from a screenplay perspective, because that's so incredibly difficult to do as a writer, but also when he's
Mm,
directing it. Um, and he doesn't care how difficult or how fucking absurd the freaking premise is. Like Tenet, I think I'd challenge Chase to watch Tenet, because that's probably one of his movies that he gets a lot of shit for.
I
He
was gonna
doesn't
say
care.
Tenet, I think, is one that he gets the most criticism for, right? I'd
Yeah.
say that's probably the one movie that everyone's kind of like, okay, like we,
And it's,
you know,
dude, I
you
mean,
do here?
it's so over the top, and it is a difficult concept. Like, I'm sure like the studio heads are probably like, I don't even understand what the fuck you're talking about, but here's the money anyway, just because you've made us a lot of money. Yeah, it's like, I don't know as a writer how he wrote that and also put that on the screen, because like even when I watch it, sometimes I'm like, I have trouble keeping up with the back and forth and who's where at what time, and he just knows, dude. It's like, it just comes natural to him. So I mean, I respect him for taking a lot of narrative risk as well, because you don't really see that with a lot of directors nowadays. And I think he did the same thing with Oppenheimer. You know what I mean? Where it's like, you're in the past, you're in the present, you're just bouncing back and forth, but like he executes it so smoothly where it's not a mess. It just works together really well. It's really cohesive.
Yeah, I think, I don't think he gets as much credit for his writing ability too. I was going to say, and I agree with that. I think because we've seen other movies that, and other filmmakers, I guess we can say, that attempt to do that, and it doesn't always work, right? Especially when you're like, if you're going to shift timelines and you have like disorienting, like different shifts in the focus of the narrative, like that can be hard to withstand sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to just the strength of the narrative. So I think Nolan does that really well. Does he write? I don't know if he co-writes some of his movies, right? Does he write them all himself, or does he write them with
Yeah,
Writes with his
so I
brother,
mean,
doesn't he?
he writes to his
so
brother, I thought.
the Dark Knight trilogy he did with his brother, but a lot of the ones after that were just him. Interstellar was, I think that was a movie that Paramount was doing with Spielberg, actually. I read the original premise, and it's so far from where Interstellar actually ended up. Like, he took like just an idea and just kind of did his own thing with it. But yeah, he's written his own screenplays after the Dark Knight trilogy. He does it on his own. Like Tenet, Oppenheimer, Dunkirk, they're all his own screenplays. Dunkirk is actually the shortest one, which is only, I think he said it was only like 50 pages, 40 or 50 pages, and most screenplays are like 120 for a 2-hour movie. But that's just because like there's so much silence. Right? Yeah, so there's so much silence in that movie that, he kind of just utilized that to his advantage. But he's such a talented writer, man, and I really think he's not underrated, because a lot of people hold him at high regard, but I think just because how he does at the box office, you know what I mean? He's a big name and he makes big money, but I think people, if you strip that away, you could really see, a director that cares about the material and cares about what he's putting out, and just cares about, making a good movie or something different that people haven't seen before.
Yeah. And he's a huge proponent for, like you were talking about, how his just love for cinema. I mean, he really is a supporter of seeing movies in theaters. I mean, he's been very vocal about that for a
film
long
projection
time.
too.
Yeah, but even his support for home media, like physical media and movies.
That was something that I forgot to talk about too. He was actually a huge advocate of, like, when Blu-ray came out. He was doing a lot of stuff with the Dark Knight Blu-ray and the IMAX sequences with that, and he was just heavily involved. And he's super involved in any kind of physical media technology. Like, so when 4K came out, he was there kind of exploring the whole HDR thing and how can I implement that in my transfers. He's heavily involved in his transfers. So I think, that's just awesome of him. The fact that he's also a big proponent and advocate of physical media and keeping his movies alive that way versus just, through the streaming platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of us. I wanted to throw this movie recommendation out there for you. It doesn't deal with time travel, but you should definitely watch The Naked Lunch if you'd like.
Naked Lunch. Which one's that?
That's Cronenberg, that adaptation I was talking about the novel that had no plot and made no sense.
Yeah, I think you were texting me about that one, weren't you?
Yeah, it's got Peter Weller's in it.
Let me see. Okay, yeah.
RoboCop.
Yeah, Peter Weller, Judy Davis.
Yeah, for the most part, it makes no sense. Yeah, I mean, I've been able to understand it after watching it more, and there's a plot there for sure. But I would just be super curious, because I'd have to put it up there as confusing as Tenet for sure.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely check that out. That sounds like an intriguing movie. But-
Gabe, I know
Naked Lunch.
is there a Nolan film that you would recommend that Chase and I watch if we haven't seen it already? I mean, we've seen Batman, we've seen, Dunkirk. I don't know if Chase has seen Dunkirk, but I know we've all seen Oppenheimer. But is
I
there
haven't seen
one
Dunkirk.
that you would
Dunkirk for
recommend?
sure. I mean, you've seen Dunkirk,
Yeah.
so I mean, like for Chase, I'd definitely
Yeah.
say Dunkirk. I don't know which one. I think you've seen all of his movies, haven't you? Will?
I think I've seen all of them. I'm trying to let me look at the
see,
list and see.
Yeah,
'Cause
let me look at his
there
filmography. I mean,
maybe
if
one
you
that
haven't
maybe I'm
seen,
missing.
did you watch The Following, like his first one?
I've seen Following. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you've seen them all. I could be wrong.
You know what? I mean, I'd be interested to rewatch Following and even Insomnia because it's just been so long since I've seen those movies.
Did you watch The Prestige?
Prestige? Yeah. So The Prestige,
Yeah.
I appreciate The Prestige. Like I appreciate. I mean, obviously, I know that he's a talented director. But The Prestige is probably one of my least favorite of his films.
Interesting.
I think it's just the whole concept just doesn't. I don't know. It just wasn't my thing.
Just
I'm not
doesn't-
saying
yeah.
that it's not interesting or anything like that. It just for some reason it just didn't click with me.
Yeah, I think when I did his ranking, I had Dark Knight Rises as his weakest movie.
Hmm.
There
Yeah, I think
was
you
just
did.
something about it. Yeah, it's just kind of, I think he loses a lot of the kind of grounded realism from the other two movies that just kind of just don't
Yeah.
translate well in The Dark Knight Rises. But I mean, I think
Let's
you've
actually
seen
do
them all.
that.
Well,
Let's do that. Let's go roundtable and give each other recommendations for the directors for movies we haven't seen. I think that's a great way to end this, actually.
Yeah. Well, you guys I'll give you guys one from Carpenter. I don't know if you guys have seen this, Chase. I don't know if you have. It's a movie called Starman from the mid '80s.
No, I haven't.
no, I've heard of
Kurt
it,
Russell,
but I haven't
right?
seen it.
It's actually really good. It's a science fiction movie. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it's sci-fi, but it's actually a more of like a romantic
Romance, right?
drama. Like I think
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
great. And if we want to talk about directors going, outside of their comfort zone, I mean, it's probably unlike anything else that Carpenter has done. So I would highly recommend you guys check out Starman. Fantastic little movie with what's his name? Jeff
Kurt
Bridges, I think,
Oh,
is
it's
in
Jeff
there.
Bridges. Okay.
Jeff
Mm.
Bridges,
'Cause
yeah.
it's in the
So
new
really,
Columbia
really good
set.
movie. Yeah.
For people that are curious, that movie, if you are a fan of it and you didn't know, that's in Columbia Classics Volume 4, restored in 4K. That's the
Hmm.
whole reason I want that.
Oh,
I've seen it forever ago, like
Hmm.
15 plus years ago. I don't remember it
Mhm.
at all. I remember loving it. So I really, really want the Columbia Classics set for that movie.
Yeah.
just hate those damn sets, man. They piss me off.
Yeah. 5 years later, we'll get a standalone release.
Yeah, we'll get the standalone eventually. So that's a good one. I'll notate Starman. What about you, Chase? David Cronenberg.
I'd actually have to think about
Recommendation.
what Will hasn't. I mean, so I recommended you Naked Lunch, but I just find it blasphemous that you've never seen Videodrome.
Yeah, I think you're.
There's just
but
yeah, it's crazy. That would be a crazy double feature for you, man. Like Naked Lunch and
Naked
then
Lunch and
Videodrome.
Videodrome.
Yeah, because I feel like that's
you
the
need a
best way.
break after that, Gabe. You need a mental break
Yeah.
after that.
It's crazy. Like Naked Lunch, it's not really. It has horror elements, but it's
Mhm.
not horror. It's a sci-fi movie.
Okay.
But even then, that's kind of a stretch. Okay, so the best way to describe Naked Lunch would be all of the acid scenes in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Ooh,
That's actually a really that's a
that's trippy.
that's a great that's a good way to
Now
put
I'm
it
like
there.
excited but worried at the
That's
same
really-
time.
You'll like it because I mean, it's got RoboCop, man. It's got Peter Wellers
As
as
the
the fucking
dude.
man.
RoboCop,
But,
yeah.
I'd have to look for you, Will. So for David Cronenberg, I'd really have to see.
Yeah, what haven't I
Um,
seen? Let me look.
yeah.
Yeah,
through
you've
his
seen
films.
Will's seen like everything, so like
You've
kind of
definitely
hard
seen
to recommend
Scanners.
it.
Oh, Scanners, of course. No, I have
Spider?
Scanners. Spider. I don't know if I have. I don't think I have seen Spider.
You'll like
There you
that.
go. Spider. Did you
I'll
see
check it
Insomnia,
out
Will,
later.
for Nolan or
Yeah,
no?
I've seen Insomnia.
Okay, so you've seen all of his movies.
I'd
You
assume
can't
you'd want me to
challenge
watch
Will.
Dunkirk.
Yes.
Let me
dude, for
let me
sure,
check Nolan again though,
100%.
Gabe. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen all his
Just
films.
because I think that you've seen a lot of his sci-fi stuff, so I think it'd be cool to break out and see Dunkirk.
I think it'd be a cool little versus, not really a versus, but just a follow up to this episode of us just like a quick 20, 25-minute fire off of the movies
Yeah.
we're telling each other to watch.
Yeah,
That'd
that'd be
kinda
good,
cool.
man.
And the
Yeah,
4K is
cool.
great. So if you have the 4K to watch it, dude, that 4K Blu-ray fucking smacks. Like the IMAX scenes are incredible on it.
For Dunkirk, yeah, I have
Yeah.
it. Yeah, Existence. So there's actually a lot. Like you've surprisingly seen a good amount of Cronenberg, Gabe. You've seen History of Violence, Eastern Promises, The Brood. You've seen The Dead Zone.
Yes, I've seen Dead
Okay.
Zone.
Yeah.
There was one I was going through his filmography though that I hold on. I'm trying to pull his filmography up again. I think you guys were talking about. I was like, I don't know if I'd seen that or not.
You also might like M Butterfly.
I haven't seen that one. I saw Cosmopolis because the challenge that we had. Seen Dead Zone.
Did you know that movie actually isn't a commentary on capitalism?
Really?
It's just how it ended up. He said that it was actually the freakiest thing making that movie ever because he said a lot of things kept manifesting. Like they were already filming it around the time that the Occupy thing was happening, but they weren't trying to push that agenda. The same thing with the pie into like the capitalist face.
Yeah.
Rupert Murdoch got pied in the face, which is what a lot of people correlate that to when Murdoch got pied. They thought they put that in there, but the thing is they had already filmed that scene and then that happened in real life. So
That's
he's
so
like,
fucking
holy
weird.
shit, you know? He thinks it's astounding the way that like people correlated it in the movie. He was like, nah, dude, it's just about a movie about a dude just wanting to get a haircut.
I'm like, bro, it has to be more about other things because I mean, some of the freaking like conversations in that movie, I'm like, you can't tell me that's all it's about.
It's about. He just doesn't. He thinks it's great. People correlate that. He just doesn't think it's a scathing review on capitalism, like people say. It's about capitalism, but not in the scathing.
It's because he would do a deeper analysis of it. That's why it's like in his mind, it's like if I did a movie about if I set my mind to doing a movie about capitalism, it would look completely different. That's why, even though there are clear capitalistic themes in that movie.
Yeah. It's about just a dude with a lot of money and the inconveniences and following what would be minor or major to somebody in that life, and what a warped reality and perception of somebody with a warped reality and perception, what it would be like interjecting in their day. That's why the whole stigma with the car, everybody that rotates in and out of the car, like people just keep coming in and out.
Yeah.
That's his like little business office. And there's like some allegories for it that he's talked about. But yeah, man, the movie's pretty wild how that movie ended up getting made. That's crazy. But yeah, that one would be a good one for you, Will. Gabe, another one that you might like. Because you like dramas and like character studies. M Butterfly is one of his most underrated movies he's ever done. Will, have you seen that?
Butterfly, I think I remember
it has Jeremy
seeing
Irons
that
in it.
with
Yeah, it's got Jeremy Irons.
That's my dude.
Yeah, I think I've seen Butterfly. I'm looking at I'm looking over his movies right now to see what else.
Yeah, because they've got some crazy ones. But I need to watch The Prestige by Nolan and Dunkirk, because The Prestige sounds awesome. That's the one with Jackman, right?
Yeah, that one I really like a lot. I feel like there's a cool, like, I mean, it's just a scattered narrative again, and things aren't what they seem. That's a good one. And then Dunkirk would be like if you kind of want to break away from his like sci-fi fantasy comic book stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, Dunkirk always looked really good. I heard the Atmos. It's Atmos in that one, right? Or
no, he doesn't use Atmos. That's the weird thing. None of his movies have Atmos. Like like crazy. People have questioned. No one's asked him directly. I think it's just because he's a super like conservative or traditionalist in the sense of like, hey, 5.1, like, like let's just roll with, you know, it's not broken. Let's keep utilizing it. So none of his 4Ks have Atmos.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Because I mean, overheads like in something like Dunkirk would sound insane. I mean,
dude,
Civil War being a prime example. Like Civil War sounded crazy. Yeah, dude, I saw it in Dolby, man.
Looks so good. Oh, I thought you meant the 4K.
No, not yet.
The 4K. I mean, it sounds good at home too with the Dolby setup.
Hell yeah, 7.1 is the way to go. 5.1 is great too. But any other closing thoughts for us guys on our favorite directors?
No, I think, I mean, I'm curious to see what people comment down below. Maybe we'll get some ideas to do another kind of like director roundabout if people comment down below and let us know what directors they like, and maybe we can do another one of these like director roundabout episodes.
Yeah. Talk about their filmography for something else that somebody else wants us to dissect or talk about. That'd be awesome. Yeah, definitely comment down below, guys.
I want to get more in depth with some of these directors too, because I
Mhm.
mean, it's about an hour and a half, for a podcast, but we could always break it up into segments and really get into some movies, like deep conversation, which I think we've been talking about doing. So maybe we'll do some
Yeah.
of that stuff too.
That'll be exciting.
Cool.
Will, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I'll close us out, guys. Thanks for talking. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the conversation as always. Everybody, if you like this video, if you like listening to this video or this type of content, check it out. We have more podcast episodes dating back to what, October of
last
what
year.
was it? Of last
Yeah,
year.
it's been almost
It's
a
amazing.
year.
We're coming up on a year, everybody. So check it out. We have a plethora of content available to check out, not only on YouTube, but for the podcast on other podcast platforms. So check all that stuff out. For those of you on YouTube, the deal by now. Like, subscribe. Hit the notification bell every time we post content like this. You will be notified. We will see you guys soon. Thanks so much for checking this out.
See you guys later.
Everyone.